So, Bob, you came over.
I did.
You sat down, and we talked about some interesting topics.
We did.
That we can't really share on the podcast. But while the microphones are on and we're recording, let's actually talk about things that we can talk about on the podcast and answer some emails. What do you say?
Yeah, sure.
So this first email, it's a bit of a long one, but I think it's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Anonymous patron. And just as a caveat or an introduction, this email highlights very well the pitfalls of oversharing from a therapist, of having too much self-disclosure. You know, I'm often on my soapbox saying, hey, self-disclosure, it is a science-based method of improving outcomes in therapy. It's been shown time and time again. There's a lot of weird dogma that you'll hear even from professors that you're never supposed to self-disclose. That is not the standard of practice. That's not the history of that doesn't reflect the history of our field. If you don't want to self-disclose, it's totally fine. There are pitfalls to it, which we could go over and we will in this bit. But to just blanketly say never self-disclose, and then also you'll have a lot of novice therapists who just somehow picked up on this notion that they should never self-disclose. And so I'm often on the pro self-disclosure side of things, not because you should just self-disclose, but it can be very powerful to a client to strategically self-disclose. Like they are single and they're lonely and they're having a hard time wondering if they'll ever find someone that will be compatible with them, that will love them. And you just drop in a little self-disclosure. It's like, yeah, when I was younger, I felt very similar, but I know how that feels. It's very demoralizing, but I kept at it and I just sort of acted as if I would meet my person, and I eventually did. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's going to happen to you, but yeah, I've been in the depths of that demoralization. I get it. That's all you say. You don't go into the details, and that can make a client feel like, okay, well, if my therapist had this feeling, I'm not alone. They understand me. I'm not crazy. This is normal. Maybe there's hope. If my therapist found someone, maybe I could too. Okay, but this email actually talks about the other side of things. Did my therapist share too much with me about her own life? I recently stopped seeing my psychologist after about a year, technically by mutual agreement, but I feel unresolved about it. She initiated things winding down, as she said me going to therapy is perpetuating my internal feeling that I'm broken. I understand her point, but also I haven't been fully honest in sessions with her for a while because of some professional boundaries that I think were crossed during our last few months of seeing each other. So just chiming in here, without going into the issues of self-disclosure, what do you think about that statement? And who knows if the anonymous patron is accurate about this, but based on the description, that the therapist initiated termination after a year because she says that the perpetuating therapy is perpetuating an internal feeling in the client that she's broken, so we should just stop therapy. What do you think about that?
I can't imagine I would ever say that to a client, though I wouldn't be opposed to exploring it if they wanted to. But I don't think I'd offer it as a fact. And I don't think I can't imagine that I would ever say, well, we must terminate as a result of, I think it's probably a mistake.
Right. Yeah, I think it's based often on a notion that is fine to have if this is your orientation. It's not yours, it's not mine.
No.
But it's fine to have this orientation that therapy is supposed to be brief. There are solution-focused people, there's CBT people, and I have a lot of respect for solution-focused folks. I use their technique, I use their philosophy a lot, but it's not my foundation of how I operate. And they will have this notion of like, look, our job is to help people. And once we help them, then we should terminate as fast as we can, even if the client doesn't want to terminate, because we're just playing into their idea that there's something wrong with them. And, because unless they give me something as a therapist, that's obviously a goal that they want to work on, that therapy can help with, then there's no point. And I would be selfish and maybe greedy by keeping them in therapy. What do you think about that statement?
That's not something I would ever utter. I don't. I think there's that not being able to articulate a goal doesn't necessarily mean there isn't one.
Right.
And believing that a client articulating a goal is the standard by which I think if you consider that a lot of attachment needs are disowned, then there won't ever be a conscious goal.
Right. Yeah, there's so many deeper issues in therapy that therapy can help with that the client won't know how to articulate, and they need our help. Now, are there moments in my career, rare moments, where I feel like a client is just coming in because they're having a hard time letting go and there's literally nothing to work on, or they're not ready to actually work on the things that maybe even, because everyone needs therapy for infinity. Like there's no, everyone needs tremendous amount of work and self-awareness and support and an opportunity to explore. Like that just never ends. There's no end point to that. That's our orientation. That's our philosophy. For some other therapists, it's not, and that's fine. Yeah. As long as they are clear about that in their advertising and their disclosures. Yeah. But are there occasional times when someone is not necessarily, they're not giving me anything to work with, and two, when I do start to introduce avenues of other sorts of avenues to explore and to work on, they don't want to, they resist, or they maybe even explicitly just say, I don't want to go into that area now. Then I might say, well, we might want to think about termination. That's pretty rare, but I have been there before. Or if a client comes in, and I've certainly been here before in my early career, where the client is resistant. They don't want to be there.
Oh yeah, that.
They're physically there, and they'll say they want help. And I'll just never forget. I think this might have been the last time it happened, but this would have been 20 years ago. And it was a young woman, and she came into therapy, and she sat down. And she's like, she kind of is meandering about what she wants out of therapy, which is fine. And some people don't know in the beginning, so I have to help them understand what therapy can help with, or help them to do some introductory self-awareness exploration so that they might be able to discover for themselves even what's wrong. Because, for some people, it's just like they know that something's wrong psychologically and relationally, but they can't describe it. They just know something's wrong. I don't know what it is. I just know that I'm wrong somehow, and so I need therapy. Or someone suggested this, and so I thought I'd give it a shot. So, sometimes it might take a few sessions where I have that back and forth. It's a little bit of psychoeducation to some extent of just like what therapy is and what it can do.
Right.
And so I did a little bit of that, and I just got this sense that she just wasn't actually, she was saying she was wanting therapy, but everything was in the different direction, and I could feel it. It felt scary to me. It felt frustrating, like immediately. Very different from other initial sessions with other clients. I mean, usually in the first session, all I have to do is say, what do you want out of therapy? And then they just talk for 55 minutes, because usually in that first session, they have a lot of buildup of talking, of detail, of desperation, So in the normal situation, and really this persists throughout therapy, is that therapy is an opportunity for clients to finally get a lot of shit off their chest. And if I don't interject, the client's just going to talk and talk, which is great. You know what I mean? That's I know I'm in kind of the best zone when that's happening, when clients are going down a road and I'm maybe chiming in every now and then, but I don't have to interfere or direct or anything like that. Anyway, so something was frustrating about it. And at a certain point, I was like, well, so are you wanting to work on this? And she's like, no. And I'm like, okay, so tell me more. And then she starts going down this weird avenue. And I'm like, so okay, so I'm just trying to get some, because I have my notes in front. So I'm sometimes I literally will point at my clipboard. I'll be like, so I have this little section on my notes where I actually write down what you want out of therapy. And so I kind of want to get that out of the way so that I have at least a touchstone in the beginning. So can you tell me like what you want? And then at some point early, like 15 minutes in the session, as I maybe asked this question 3 times, she says, well, you're the doctor. You tell me what I should work on. it was hostile. And I'm like, what? I mean, when I hear a phrase like that, I'm thinking, huh? What?
Yeah.
It's like walking into your physician and you're like, I desperately, or an emergency room, and you walk up to the physician and you're just like, I have a medical emergency. And the physician's like, okay, well, what's going on? Well, you're the doctor, you tell me. And the doctor's like, well, you look fine to me, but you're going to have to tell me, unless there's something obvious. And there wasn't. Yeah. I mean, there was something kind of obvious about her that was, and I guess looking back, maybe I could have said something like that. I could have been like, well, you seem like, if you're really wanting me to give you feedback about a possible thing you need to work on, it's like, you seem to be coming in here combative with me and passive aggressive against me. Do you want to talk about that? Which, looking back, I guess I should have maybe at least offered that. But I didn't. I just thought, oh boy. And so I proceeded to try to extract from her any kind of collaborative exploration of a goal, and it wasn't happening. And I just said, well, maybe it's best that you not be in therapy and that you think about for a time exactly, because, any therapist you go to, they're going to ask the same questions I just asked. And so unless you have a clear answer to what would you like me to help you with, then I wouldn't bother going to therapy. So I think we should terminate this session, and I'm not going to charge you, because I just wanted to get her the fuck out of my office. I'm just like, will you just get, because it was real hostile. I'm not describing how hostile. Am I describing how hostile it was?
Probably not.
Yeah, it felt really gnarly. Yeah. It felt scary. It felt like, am I on candid camera? Is this person trying to set me up to sue me or so? I don't know. It felt very nefarious is the thing. And it was very noticeable because I still remember it after 20 years.
Right.
I mean, I remember where she was sitting in my office. I remember vaguely kind of what she looked like, but anyway, so anyway, point is that in this email, an anonymous patron is writing in and saying that the therapist terminated with her because she said that her going to therapy is perpetuating her internal feeling that she's broken. And I'm guessing that the therapist didn't have a clear goal that she felt was worthy of therapy or something, something like that. And who knows, maybe we could believe that. But going on with the email here. As things progressed, I feel that my therapist started feeling very relaxed with me and started sharing a lot. I'm somewhat complimented by my that my therapist felt she could be so open with me. And just chiming in here, I hear that a lot when I hear about therapist oversharing. I hear that statement of just like, it felt good that the therapist, that a therapist would bless me with their personal information,
like I'm special.
Yeah, I'm special. And that's a red flag, for the therapist, that they shouldn't be doing. However, some things she said were quite personal. Below are some of the things she shared with me on various occasions. 1, telling me her father is an addict and she is responsible for managing all of his money and affairs. So just chiming in here, just hearing that bit, does that automatically indicate that that's a problem with a disclosure?
No, not to me.
Why?
It depends on the circumstance. If the client had a similar experience, that might be, relevant.
Right. So the 3 tenets of evidence-based self-disclosure is that it's brief, it's brief enough to get the point across, and that it's in the effort of trying to help the client, and that you as a therapist have quote-unquote processed the emotionality of it enough such that it doesn't come out in a way that is burdening to the client to take care of you.
Right.
So those are the 3 principles.
I like those principles.
And we don't know just based on what the therapist said. Because I'll hear that from people who email in and they'll be like, is it unethical that my therapist told me that they went through a divorce? I mean, that seems like really personal. It's like, well, it depends, Yeah. It depends on those 3 principles.
Right.
Now, even if you follow those 3 principles, could it still go awry? Could a client still be put off by it? Sure, things happen, but generally speaking. But it sounds like that's not what the case was. It sounds like the therapist was yammering about these things in a way that was conversational. Or you share, and then I share, and then you share, and then I share.
Yeah.
Number 2, telling me in detail about her in-process divorce with her husband and some of the fights and arguments that they have had. So what do you think about that one?
That's not something I would do. It's just because it's in process. There's a chance that it hasn't been worked through properly, so that it's not hijacking the session.
Right, exactly. That's exactly why that's the principle that has been found in the research literature, because it would be impossible to distance yourself emotionally enough or have healed enough from a divorce while you're going through it to be able to speak with a client in a way that didn't burden them or didn't become too much about the therapist.
Right.
And also, it just sounds like a classic background life for a therapist that starts to lose their ability to stay within the standard of practice. Divorce is just a classic breeding ground for all sorts of unethical behavior on therapists. When you hear about therapists that commit acts of violation of the law or of ethics or the standard of practice, it's often learned that the therapist was going through a divorce because it's a very, very difficult time.
Like dysregulated.
Yeah. And you have a lot of need to talk. It's totally understandable that if you're going through a divorce as a therapist and your client starts complaining about their partner, that you would feel compelled to also share. Be like, oh my God, me too. I mean, well, today, oh my God, my husband. Sure. But you need to talk to your supervisor and your friends and your therapist about that. So, number 3, telling me about her 2 past suicide attempts. What do you think about that one?
Again, it depends. If they're worked through and if they're in service of the client, then okay, fine. Maybe you're normalizing it.
Right.
If not, then yeah.
Yeah. That could be a powerful self-disclosure.
Sure.
It could also be risky to tell someone because sometimes even when you're trying to help and you disclose things like this, it can seemingly motivate someone to actually take action themselves. It's a weird phenomenon.
Yeah.
But in and of itself, it could be a powerful therapeutic self-disclosure. I mean, imagine you think about suicide, or maybe even you attempted, and there's a lot of shame, a lot of stigma, a lot of isolation, and then your therapist says, "Look, I'm going to tell you, when I was younger, I attempted a couple times, and I felt all the same feelings that you're feeling. Here's what I did." And, you kind of briefly lay out the bullet points or something. And that could be a powerful self-disclosure. Right. I mean, I could see a client completely turning around just from that self-disclosure, or really holding on to that as a foundation for their resiliency. My therapist knows, or that kind of thing. Makes me actually tear up just thinking about it. Number 4, telling me about her suspicion that she herself has borderline personality disorder. Similar thing.
Yeah.
Number 5, telling me she got deregistered from medical school for using drugs and some strange experiences she had while using drugs in medical school. For example, cutting open a cadaver while she was high. What do you think about that one?
I cannot see how that would serve a client.
I mean, maybe if there's some related thing, like I've struggled with drug abuse myself, but the other thing here is, and I never know if this is the right usage of this phrase, is stupid as a stupid does. Because therapists who make mistakes, like oversharing, it's often just one of 15 problems. They often also have problems with their paperwork. They often also have problems with asking clients to become their babysitter or something. Like they don't understand it all. All of their training has been thrown out the window, not just one part of their training. So what I'm hearing is that this individual in the past, when they were in medical school, they also had a problem. They've had a problem throughout their career with understanding boundaries and professionality and healthy behavior. Number 6, telling me she is scared her current partner might commit suicide. Again, depends. Number 7, telling me that she told her psychologist that she doesn't think she should be practicing right now, but he told her that she is okay to practice. So what do you think about that one?
Wow, that undermines a client's confidence in therapy and is really distracting.
Yeah. And again, just indicates something's going on with this clinician, that at some point she started to wonder if she's able to practice, ethically able to practice, and so much so that she tells her own psychologist, I don't think I'm capable of practicing. And for whatever reason, the psychologist said, no, you're fine. Now, her own psychologist, which is her own clinician, cannot really make that call because they're not the person's supervisor. They're their person. If a client was a therapist, asked me, am I fit to practice? I would say, I could give you my very mild opinion, but ethically speaking, I can't provide you with a competent evaluation because it's a dual role.
Yeah.
I like you and I care about you and I want to support you because I'm your clinician. So I'm biased. Plus, for me to truly answer the question, I'd have to look into your records. I'd have to maybe even interview some of your clients, and that would be a dual role, and that would interfere with treatment. So if you really want to answer that question from a professional, you need to hire someone that's an independent reviewer of your practice. And honestly, if a therapist asked me that, I'd be like, if you're thinking that, then you absolutely need to be seeking an outside opinion, because that's not a normal thing that therapists will think. Now, I could see a therapist having over shame about something, like they were late a couple of sessions and they think like their entire practice is a sham or something. There's a lot of imposter syndrome. Anyway, going on with the email. I know none of these complaints are particularly bad, but as she started sharing more, I became more guarded during our sessions. So this is, just chiming in here, this is what I really wanted to get to, because it just really shows what the self-oversharing does to a client. I think I felt like she needed me to be an easy client as she was going through a rough time. What do you think the anonymous patron means by that?
Well, don't do things or say things that the therapist might find difficult or provocative. So censor myself so that I can be a resource for the therapist.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The impression that the client is getting is, well, one, my therapist is going through something really rough. And two, the therapist has shifted to this other mode where they're really relaxed in session, probably because my therapist thinks that I don't have a lot of issues that I need to work on. And, we could see a scenario where you and I might even voluntarily and ethically head into as well, but it'll be really brief. Like, say we work intensely for a couple of years with a client, and then they say they want to wrap things up, and say we have a final session, and we head into the session not getting into any material because we don't want to open up another topic. And you and I might be a little bit more casual, might be a little bit more friendly in that last session or the last 15 minutes of the last session or something. Mm-hmm. A little bit, not necessarily self-disclosing, like, let me tell you about my life, but just a little bit more relaxed, less intense. And in those moments, it's like, okay, I as a therapist, I don't really have to work super hard in these last 15 minutes because we've all agreed that things are going to end soon. And now I'm probably still intensely thinking about things as a therapist. But anyway, point is like, there's nothing wrong with having the last little bit of the last session being that way, but to have that be all the time, right? Where you're transitioning to a more casual conversation style could give the impression to a client that, I don't think, because, you could imagine that happen. The way that I think it's happening is like, they worked on things in the beginning, then at some point things got a little easier in therapy for the client. Then the therapist starts to become more casual. Then at some point the client is thinking, well, I'm paying all this money and I'm spending all this time, so I kind of want to talk about X, Y, and Z, but I kind of get the impression that my therapist, it would be kind of jarring to them, because if I brought this up, it would require her to think and shift the mode of therapy back to her being more professional, which I don't want to burden her with. You can imagine a client feeling that way.
I could.
Going on. I now feel quite conflicted about the therapy profession in general and whether I should find another therapist. Am I perhaps too reliant on having a therapist? What do you think about that?
It would be impossible to know based on the email, but I can't imagine that would be true. And it seems like a reasonable thing. Here's what really stands out. What really stands out is the client's confidence in therapy has been undermined by their experience, and that bothers me. I think it's in our interest. It's good ethical practice to leave people with a positive impression of therapy, so that they can seek it out when they need it, if they need it at some point in the future. Mm-hmm. Even if I'm not the therapist that they need, that they should feel good about going to therapy, so that the door doesn't shut.
Right. Yeah, that's one of my worst nightmares, is when something goes wrong in therapy with me, the therapist, and the client writes off therapy in general. Because I'm like, look, fine, you don't like me, right? What are we going to do? But don't give up. Yeah. Find your person, because you deserve to have that therapeutic relationship. So yeah, that's pretty awful. Yeah. I get a lot of emails like this. So my initial statement or reaction to this of like, I have she says I have a conflicted relationship with therapy in general. Now, my first reaction is conflicted, because on one hand, I want to say, well, no, this therapist, there's something wrong. This therapist is an outlier. But then I get a lot of emails like this, and I'm like, oh, I don't know how much of an outlier this person is. I really don't know. Mm-hmm. I imagine, I think research would show this is an outlier. And I've heard stories where you could really try to vet your therapists, and you could have 5 therapists that are in this category in a row. And it's depressing. Mm-hmm. It's like, because it's hard enough to find a therapist, it's hard enough to get funding for it, it's hard enough to get ramped up in therapy. It takes a good 5-10 sessions to get into the flow. And then to find out that you found another dud or someone that's harmful. And especially because as a client, you don't know what's right or wrong. Like, if I were a client and the therapist started launching into these stories, it would be pretty quick that I'd be like, something's wrong here. 1, what's going on with this therapist? 2, I'm wasting my fucking time and money. Yeah. Like, I'm spending a lot of time and money here. 3, I would never say anything like that. 4, if I had a supervisee that said shit like this, I'd come down and I'm like a ton of bricks. Like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, this isn't your therapy session, you fucking idiot. You know what I mean? Like, do you not understand what therapy is? So, I would notice it pretty quickly, and I would bounce pretty quickly. And that's what I would do. I wouldn't even given this description, I wouldn't be like, unless the therapist was like this golden god of therapy that I was benefiting greatly from, I might say something like, hey, I need you to cut back on the self-disclosure, because it bothers me. It makes me feel like you're not really taking this seriously, and you're making it more about you. And I feel bad about that, because I want you to get your support, but I don't want to, I'm getting increasingly angry as you talk about your life for 15 minutes, and all I can think of is, I'm paying for this? Yeah. So I guess I would say something like that. But most likely I would just be like, this is the tip of the iceberg of this is an impaired, terrible clinician. I need to get out of this as fast as I can. And by the way, anonymous patron, you can report this person to the licensing board. This is reportable for sure. Mm-hmm. And that could help your therapist. It could help your therapist to get back on track. Yeah. To report someone they don't throw them in therapy jail. The board tries to preserve the practice, because the state, the government, has an interest in having as many clinicians out there as possible. And they're not in the business of destroying people's lives. So in all likelihood, the therapist would be given a lot of opportunity to learn and to change their ways. So, you could make a report, but it's up to you. And there are ways of making anonymous reports. Oh, by the way, so I found out what my report was. Yeah. Remember the letter? Let's take a break. When we get back, I'll talk about that.
Okay.
We're back from the break. Yeah, so I received the actual report that someone made about me, and it was anonymous, and it was very short. Uh-huh. I've already talked about this at length on the podcast. I don't know if I've posted that episode, but I don't want to go into a lot of detail on my side, but I am very curious as to what you think about this. Okay, so here's the complaint. This is their words that they typed into the form. This person is an MFT, and then they provide my license. So this is all true so far. And is not a licensed psychologist, but they represent themselves as a psychologist and use the term doctor across their wide and very public marketing / promotional platforms. And then they list my website, YouTube, and Patreon. What do you think about that?
Nothing wrong with you calling yourself a doctor. You are.
Yeah.
You're not. You never said you're a psychologist.
No, I'm adamant about not calling myself a psychologist because it's not ethical or possibly legal for me to do that. Plus, I don't give a fuck.
You don't care.
I don't need or want to call myself a psychologist.
Right.
I could easily become a psychologist if I took the test, which is no small endeavor, but I like being a licensed marriage and family therapist. I like being trained as a psychologist. It's fine. So they say that I represent myself as a psychologist, which I never have and never did.
Yeah.
And use the term doctor. What do you think about this phrase? He uses the term doctor across his very wide, very public marketing and promotional platforms. What do you think about that?
That is a fact.
Yeah. Yeah. But
the implication is that that's improper somehow.
Yeah.
But you have a doctorate, so
yeah,
indeed.
And I have a podcast and a YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Arguably, every clinician has an online presence of some sort.
I think you're supposed to.
Yeah.
Ethically, you're supposed to, right?
I think on HIPAA, it's the law.
The law, you have to.
I think I was the one who
told me that.
Yeah. I mean, don't quote me on this, that you need to have a website because you need your disclosures to be publicly available before someone signs up with you, or even ongoing clients if they need to quickly access your disclosures, or other clinicians. They need to quickly access your forms. So a hospital needs to have their disclosures disclosed to the public, and we are medical providers according to HIPAA and thus have to do that. Anyway, going on with the email. It's very important to me that I actively manage my mental health, but I worry about whether I'm perpetuating a lack of self-worth by wanting to have a therapist.
Oh, wait, was that the end of the complaint?
Yeah, that's the whole thing. That's the whole complaint.
Oh, that's it?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's such a letdown.
I know. And it's funny.
It's not even juicy.
No. I mean, that's it. I represent myself as a psychologist, and I use the term doctor. What? What?
I think it's the anonymity of the internet that permits people to, and then there's a failure in empathy in recognizing. My mom told me this joke when I was a kid. There's a fly going down the river on its back with an erection yelling, "Raise the drawbridge, raise the drawbridge."
What in the world? Your mom, what's the point? What's the moral of like arrogance of the fly or something?
Yeah.
But what a weird metaphor. I mean, there's so many other, why does a penis have to get involved in that metaphor?
I don't know. That's what she said. But anyways, but it's like this, this mob mentality and this sort of self-importance that's behind it, like the internet's a scary place to me.
Yeah. Do you think your mom meant something like toxic masculinity about it? Was it some sort of dig at men in particular?
Well, I never thought about it. It's just what happened. I don't know, I was 13 or 14 whenever she told me that one. But in retrospect, and knowing a little bit I know about, sort of my current perspective on my mother. Yeah.
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 Because it applies to men of a pissing contest,
yes,
or mine's bigger than yours contest.
Right.
Or someone who has a very small thing, someone who is very emasculated themselves, but is trying to act like they're such a big man on campus that people need to move out of the way when they're a very, very small penised individual or
as
something.
If this is the mark of, a person's qualification or whatever.
I mean, I could cut all this out, but do you think this has something to do with your mom and your dad?
Oh, yeah, without a doubt.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Like, do you want to talk about how?
Oh, I could only speculate. I don't actually know.
What's the speculation?
Well, they grew up. My parents were born in the late 30s. They grew up in the 50s, 60s. The 50s and the early 60s is their youth, and so that's a time when traditional values are what we call traditional values was just the norm. So my sense is that my mother's attitudes were impacted by the general misogyny in the world, and she wasn't shy about making that known. And I think she was really angry. And so,
how do you think she experienced the misogyny?
In terms of it limiting her choices.
How so?
Most women in her generation don't have didn't seek higher education.
Right.
Her mother made sure that she and her two sisters went to college, but they had two choices. You're going to be a teacher or a nurse. So my aunts are nurses, and my mom was a teacher. But, who knows if that's what she actually wanted to do. She didn't really consider, she wasn't offered, there wasn't an avenue through which she could easily explore what she might have wanted to do with her life. Mm-hmm. And then, the model is you get married and you have children. Mm-hmm. And so my folks are Catholic, and, the model there is you're a wife, so you're supposed to be a homemaker and you're supposed to provide sex for your husband. Now, I don't know why a bunch of people who are, ostensibly not having sex are giving advice to people who are. That's priests for you, though. Just shoving their fat noses into what other, I don't even like the way I said that, but pushing other people around and presuming with aggressive certainty that they know what's best.
Did you have bad experiences with some priests?
I think everybody's had bad experiences with priests because they're simply around, pushing their opinions on all of us.
Like, what's a story?
Oh, personally?
Yeah.
No, I didn't. I know a couple of them, but no, I never had a bad experience with them.
Oh, okay.
But I do have a problem with one
maybe
group of
what
people,
your mom went through and what other people go through.
Yeah, one group of people telling another group of people how they should be.
Yeah.
What they should do, what they should think. I got a real problem with that.
Yeah.
And nowadays it's, states like Tennessee telling people in Tennessee that they're not allowed to either participate in or go to drag shows.
Yeah.
Like, this is really a problem that we want to spend our time on.
Yeah.
It's outrageous.
Yeah.
But it's really no different than the same kinds of things that my mom went through. But maybe, well, I don't know if it's different or not, but there's certainly the same element of pushiness and arrogance.
Yeah.
And I do have a problem with that.
Yeah. The power struggle, the white male, cisgender, straight, Christian power structure, any perceived threat to that will invoke the power structure.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So on one hand, when I see stuff like that in Tennessee, it's demoralizing. But on the other hand, when I see stuff like this, the silver lining is that they wouldn't be protesting these anti-drag show people if we were 30 years in the past, or even just 10 years in the past, because they didn't have to. The white supremacists, the white cis power structure, didn't have to do anything because they had all the power.
Right.
They had all the laws. They had all the political positions. They had all the money.
Right.
And they didn't have to do anything.
Right.
But now that we're taking the power back,
and
have been for arguably 150 years since the Civil War,
whenever
we get 3 steps forward, they have to pull us back 1 step.
Yeah.
But we're winning the game. The progressives have always been winning, and we will always win as long as we keep pushing.
Yeah.
And you're going to see stuff like that. And we'll focus on it, but don't let it demoralize you. This is what I tell myself. And recognize that in countless other communities, drag shows are proliferating and being celebrated and helping people to understand, at least with that particular slice of the culture, that it's not a threat.
Yeah.
It's not a threat to your it's not even necessarily a threat to your white cis Protestant power. It's just a fucking drag show.
Yeah.
Like, let it go. It's fine.
Yeah, man.
And it's just gender fluidity. It's not going to harm you. There's nothing that's going to get you. It's not a boogeyman. They're not going to break into your house and try to degender you. Or I don't even know what they're worried about.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway. So going on with the email, it's very important to me that I actively manage my mental health, but I worry about whether I'm perpetuating a lack of self-worth by wanting to have a therapist. I also wonder if you have any thoughts on how common it is for therapists to share to this degree with clients that they feel comfortable with. Is this more normal than I think? So I think we already answered those questions.
Yeah.
But let's take a break, and we get back. Let's get to another email. What do you say?
Yep.
So, Bob, we recorded this whole second half of an episode, and it went on really long and went very personal, so I thought we'd make it into a patron-only episode. What do you say?
Yeah.
So this episode is me and Bob going deep, and this episode will just be for the patrons of the podcast. So if you want to listen to this episode, become a patron of the podcast, do it now. if you want and can afford it and care to and have the time. And everyone take care of yourself because why?
You still deserve it.